this discussion is for the 2020 CDBG application. The actual application is available through the Grants Network, which is supported through eCivis. There's a link on the CDBG webpage through the Get Funding. We have our webinars, or not webinars, but our videos of the workshops that we worked through last month. Those are up available on our website, along with the PowerPoint that supports the workshops. So if you have any questions about how to access that, there's also training on how to get into the Grants Network, and training about the different components for the CDBG also available on our website. So this training is really focused on tasks and deliverables, as those are new things that we're asking folks to complete and provide information on as part of our 2020 CDBG application. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. So a quick overview. Can you make sure Connie has the comments window open?
Yes.
A quick overview of what we're going to be looking at. We're going to talk a little bit about activity descriptions versus tasks and deliverables and how they're different. Identifying tasks and deliverables, where to start. Organizing your tasks and deliverables. Task and deliverable examples, and then documenting deliverables. I think just make sure everyone kind of knows a deliverable is a product, or it's an output of the effort, and the tasks is the efforts that you take to get to the output. So activity description, when you're preparing your activity description in your grant application, you want to be thinking who, what, where, when, and why, right? Who are you going to be assisting? What are you going to do to assist them? Where are you going to be providing this assistance? When will you be providing the assistance? Why are you providing the assistance? And that's really true regardless of whether you're doing a over-the-counter application or a public services application or a housing assistance application. There's always going to be a who, what, where, when, and why that you'll want to touch on. You don't need to necessarily provide a ton of information. The activity description field gets translated directly to HUD as part of one of their reports, and the field in HUD only allows for 4,000 characters. So if you've got a lot of information in there, it's going to cut you off at 4,000 characters, and everything after that doesn't get included. So we do want you to try and be succinct, but we also want you to do the best that you can and answer those 5 questions. And remember that this is the opportunity to pitch your activity. So we really want to understand why this activity is important to community and who this activity is going to assist. Tasks and your deliverables are really intended for you to show us how well you know what you need to do to make sure that your activity is going to be successful. There's a lot of thought has gone into how we're setting up the tasks and deliverables, and one of the things we're really looking for is to identify potential knowledge gaps where we can potentially provide additional training or technical assistance. So if you aren't entirely sure about a task or a deliverable, that's okay. You know, do the best you can, put as much information as you can in, and if there are gaps, we're going to kind of assume that that's areas that need potential training, and we'll focus towards providing training and support in those sections. In your tasks and deliverables, there's no limit on the characters, so provide as much detail as you're comfortable providing. Do be within reason. We all kind of have full-time jobs, so you know we want to make sure that we can get through these in a reasonable amount of time. These are not scored components of the competitive application. They are required for all applications. So you know, doing the best you can is really going to be good enough. We're not going to disallow an activity just because it doesn't have a thorough task or deliverable list. However, if we see a bunch of gaps, we're going to have a lot of questions for you, and questions can slow things down. So especially if you're looking at over the counter, if we have a lot of questions, it could really slow your approval down. For the competitive, if we've got a lot of questions for you and you haven't identified in your readiness, score, which is going to be scored, that you have all the pieces ready to go, your project is going to have a hard time getting funded. So we do want to know that you know what you're doing, but these sections are not specifically scored. So where do you start when you're identifying your tasks and deliverables? The best place to start, the easiest place to start for most folks, is to start with your deliverables. You start by identifying a full list of all of the potential products, reports, invoices, statements, interviews, all of the pieces that could potentially be necessary to track your activity. And each activity is going to have a different list, but each activity will have a list of things that are going to be required to show that you've met the requirements for the program. If you're not sure and you have monitoring checklists, go ahead and use those. If you need monitoring checklists, reach out to us. We are trying to update our monitoring checklists, so we have some updated ones and some old ones. We'll get the updated ones online as soon as we can. And it's okay if you use the old ones. The old ones are from HUD and they're pretty comprehensive. But if you need assistance in identifying potential products, you can go ahead and use those monitoring checklists. You can also use the federal cross-cutting requirements. Those would be your NEPA requirements, your procurement requirements, and your labor compliance requirements. You can also take a look at 2 CFR 200 for financial management requirements. These can all kind of help you identify potential products that you're going to need to have identified as deliverables in your activity. A good recommendation at this point is to prepare and outline a public information binder. It doesn't necessarily need to be a physical binder. This can be an online file, but this is where all of those products will live, right? So that folks can access those products because those are all public information products. Once you've got your list of deliverables, try to organize them chronologically through the life cycle of the activity. This is kind of my personal pro tip because it helps me. If I really identify things as chronological, it helps me identify where I might be missing something, right? That there might be a piece between my labor compliance reports and my closeout. Maybe I need a notice of completion. Maybe I need a final labor compliance report. Maybe I need various different pieces that might be gaps that I might be missing because when I did the list, I just did a brain dump and stuck everything on the list. This is kind of a pro tip on how to structure RFPs. So if you start with, when you're trying to put together an RFP, and this works for consultants, this works for architects and engineering, this works for a lot of RFPs, that professional service RFPs that y'all might be using. You can use this same process in putting together that RFP. So starting with your deliverables is a good way to help make sure that you don't end up with obscure tasks or repetitive tasks that make it really difficult to cost. So starting with your deliverables is a good process to help develop a good RFP. Every activity is going to have deliverables, but there are really kind of two types of deliverables that you'll want to be thinking about. So there's your grantee deliverables to HCD. So those are the deliverables that you're going to provide to us. That would be your financial reports, your activity reports, your NEPA clearance, desk monitoring documents that'll be requested upon identifying who's getting desk monitoring, semi and annual reports. That'll also be invoices and financial documentation that you'll submit to support your financial reports. But then there's your activity deliverables to the grantee. And if you're using a contractor, or if you're using an architect or an engineer as a project manager, or if you're working with a subrecipient or a consultant, these are all reports that you're going to need to collect from them. And they could include a whole list of different items like subrecipient reports, construction progress reports, labor standards documentation, invoices, statements, cost allocation, planning report milestones. When you're thinking about what kind of deliverables you're going to need, you want to think about what you'll want to see to prove that your activity is successful, right? If you're going to be doing a presentation in front of your city council or your board of supervisors, what are you going to show them that shows that your activity is being conducted successfully, not just at the end, but during the process of your activity?
Oh gosh, I'm not.
So Connie has a quick question.
Not quite sure. It says, do you want the items to you and the project separated?
You can separate them. You can identify them out, when you're talking about your deliverables, you'd be HCD deliverable, and then you could have activity deliverable. So you can have them be chronologically, but identify which is which. You can just list them all right? You can just list them all as deliverables. We know which ones are ours and which ones are yours. And if we have a question, we'll reach out to you to get that answered. We're not going to tell you a prescribed format that you have to use. Use the format that works best and makes most sense to you. And if you have a subrecipient or you have a consultant on board, I'd run it by them and make sure it makes sense to them too. This is your deliverables are your requirement. They're your responsibility to track on. So we want to make sure that you understand what you've put into the fields. But yeah, if you want to label them, HCD and activity, that's awesome. When you're planning your activity deliverables, use milestones. They can really help you, especially once you've started to develop your activity deliverables chronologically, right? So they can help you identify when specific components are due, what components need to come when. They can help you also to set for regular updates. You should be requiring regular updates with some sort of official documentation from your subrecipients, your consultants, from your project managers, from your construction managers, from your architects, whoever you're working with. They should be giving you regular semi-formal updates and maybe even presentations. I know a lot of city council and board meeting agendas are really packed, but if you have opportunities to do periodic presentations to update them on your activity, that's a great way to build confidence in your project, confidence in the fund management, and it lets us know that you're keeping your project super transparent and really accessible to the public. You can also use draft review and draft management to validate and as milestones. So, for consultants, it's not uncommon to have a first draft of some component or some chapter or some part of their work be required as a milestone. You can also, when you're setting up your deliverables and your milestones and your tasks, you can align this with your budget, right? Especially with construction work or consultant work or subrecipients. This allows you to say, to identify how your budget structure can fit with the deliverables and the tasks, and allows you to be really responsible and have a very detailed and product-oriented budget. You want to include your milestones and your deadlines or sections or products in your planning grants as well, right? So this isn't just for construction projects or for public service projects or for housing assistance projects, but this also applies to planning grants. If you're doing a planning grant, you should have milestones and deadlines. You should have deliverables, whether it's components of the plan, data products, whatever. You should have all of that in there to make sure that you're actively tracking on the performance of your activity. Because the whole point of having deliverables and tasks is that it gives you a mechanism to track your progress. So when you're organizing your deliverables, you're going to want to organize your deliverables chronologically if you can. It will really help you identify if you're missing anything. A really typical chronology would be, looking at this from an application point of view, and you can have multiple chronologies. You can have application chronology and actual project activity deliverable or activity process chronology, but you're just looking at this for like an application chronology. You'd have your pre-application requirements. So what do you have to do pre-application to get yourself ready? You'd have your actual application itself. So what documents are you going to need to be able to upload in your application to submit successfully? You'd have your activity kickoff. So you've been awarded funding and now it's time to get your activity started. Is there ramp up? Are you, funding an activity that's been ongoing? What are you going to need to do to get that funding into the activity budget or into the activity scope of work? You've got your actual activity implementation. So this is the timeline for which you're going to be completing your activity, whether it's a project that has a ramp up, an implementation period and a completion, or whether it's an ongoing project. This is the time when you're serving your beneficiaries, you're constructing your project, you're doing your studies. And then you have your activity completion and closeout, and that's on the back end, right? So you've completed everything, you've met your deadlines, you've met your milestones, you've completed serving your beneficiaries. So what are you going to be doing at completion and closeout to make sure that you've adequately addressed all of the needs? Use your deliverables to help manage your contractor, subrecipient, consultant performance to help set clear expectations. When you use deliverables in your RFPs, when you use deliverables in your RFQs, when you use deliverables to really direct the scope of work, right, it makes it much easier for you to actively manage what's happening with your contractor so that they know that at 50% of budget expenditure, you should have XYZ products in hand, right? And they're not asking, you're not sitting there with 90% of your budget expended waiting for your first deliverable, because that can often be a really uncomfortable position to be in. And include deliverables that you're going to be listing in your application as pre-agreement costs, because we want to know the full life cycle of your activity, not just what you're going to be doing at grant award, but stuff that happens before grant award. As we talked in our budget conversation earlier today, if we know the full scope of work, what's involved to actually get ready, that helps us be very thoughtful when we're putting together our applications, and thoughtful about what timing is required for what, as we're actually working through our setting up our applications and setting up our NOFAs. So Connie's letting me know we have some questions.
Are all deliverables and milestones established by the applicant, or does the department have some language on this as well?
So we do have some language. We've talked about some of the reports that we're requiring. Financial reports, that's what's going to be your funds requests from here on out. So those are called financial reports in the grants management system. Those are going to be required quarterly. We have activity reports. Those are also going to be required quarterly. We have semi-annual reports. Those are the same types of semi-annual reports we've always had. We have some annual reports. They're going to be very similar to the annual reports we've always had. We've got kind of those mechanisms. Those are sort of the baseline requirements. Otherwise, we're really looking for you to customize your deliverables based on what you're going to be requiring for your activity. So, what kind of memos, what kind of management, what kind of tracking are you going to be requiring to show that your activity is meeting the national objective, and that it's staying on budget, and that it's staying on target, and that it's doing what it's supposed to do. So application and pre-applications deliverables examples. So this is kind of a laundry list example. This doesn't apply, list of examples. It doesn't apply to every single type of application. Some of these are going to apply to public services. Some of these will apply to construction. So I just did a brain dump and through everything that could be a pre-application that I could think of. You can probably think of more, right? This is not an exclusive list. There's more stuff that could be included in here. But pre-application and application would be procurement, NEPA, potentially plans and specs, maybe guidelines, program forms, document templates, operating plans, strategic plans, loan underwriting information. Maybe it's your RFP, RFQ, depending on what you're working on. It's the stuff that you need to get ready to actually do your activity, right? So you'll want to think about what kind of pre-application and application deliverables you're going to need to be ready for this project. Now, when you're working through your application, you're going to notice there's stuff like housing element requirements, and there's stuff like debarment checks. Those are not necessarily deliverables to your activity. Those are program threshold requirements. You don't need to get into the discussion about what's involved in those, because those are not specific to this activity. So when we get to talk about tasks, you're not going to be listing all of the tasks for your housing element, because that's not part and parcel of this activity. But you will be listing tasks around your procurement, and you'll be listing tasks around your NEPA, because those are part of this activity.
Will CDBG be providing sample loan underwriting policies?
So we are working on putting together some underwriting, loan servicing requirements. I don't expect that we'll have anything in the next year or two. So really, we do have a set of draft guidelines for housing rehab. We're going to be working on a set of guidelines for home buyer to help work with those two programs. For now, we're allowing you to set your servicing plan and underwriting plans within scope of federal requirements. So there are some federal requirements for doing loan underwriting. And if you need more information about that, let us know. We can provide some links to HUD forms. There's a HUD CDBG home guidebook that provides, I call it the green book. So if you pull it up and it's got green formatting, you'll know you're in the green book. It's got a lot of really good guidelines for structuring or guidance for structuring, underwriting, and servicing, and just limitations and requirements for the different types of home and CDBG housing assistance programs. We do plan to provide some templates, but it's going to be a little while. So for now, we leave a lot of that up to you to determine kind of what is the best fit for your community within federal requirements. If something doesn't meet federal requirements, we will let you know. So activity kickoff through closeout. Here's just another kind of laundry list of examples. This is not all inclusive. This is just some of the stuff that we would expect you to have on your deliverables list. That could be your sealed bids, timelines and milestones, different types of reports, drafts, data, compliance, semi-annual, notice of completion, certificate of occupancy, and monitoring. And that goes for both what you would expect from us for monitoring and from yourselves, because as grantees, you're responsible for monitoring your subrecipients and your projects. You need to be making sure that you have a mechanism to track on your project. So if you have a project that results in an asset, you're going to need to track on that asset. There needs to be some mechanism for you to know that. If you're going to be doing a public service or a housing assistance, you need to have a game plan for monitoring and long-term loan servicing. And then HCD is also going to be requiring information from you. So when we talk about doing our monitoring, what we often need to monitor are your labor compliance documentation, or we need to do monitoring on your financial internal controls, or monitoring on your monitoring. And just so you know, HUD monitors us on our monitoring, so it could be monitoring on monitoring on monitoring. It gets really meta. It's super awesome. It's a good time for everyone. But it's what you need to be thinking about when you're thinking about what's involved in your activity. So it's not just what you need to provide to us, but it's also your responsibility. What are you responsible for when you're administering your funds?
Back to the green book. Is there a link you can send them?
I can, but I'm just going to Google it. So if you just Google CDBG Home Guidebook, it will pop up. It will be one of the first 2 or 3 links. Google is awesome like that. And then you'll have access to it and you'll know. We are trying to put together some resources where we're going to be linking more to HUD's guidance. But because right now our HCD website is under restrictions based on accessibility, it's a lot harder for us to upload information to our website. So we're just recommending folks go straight to the source. And if you ever need to know exactly the right Google term that we use to find stuff, let us know. We'll send that out. Google is our friend. All right, so organizing and identifying your tasks. So if you started with your chronological list of deliverables, you can now build your tasks out around each deliverable. So you'll want to take each deliverable and think about what tasks are necessary to complete that deliverable. Once you've got your list of tasks, you can organize that in chronological order, right? And I'll have some examples here in a minute to kind of show what we're talking about. This helps you think through all of the tasks that you're required for both you as a grantee and as a subrecipient or contractor, so that you're thinking about the full scope of tasks required to actually meet each deliverable. And you want to make sure that each deliverable is supported with tasks. Orphan deliverables mean that you're missing something, right? If you have a deliverable and there's no task associated with it, then it's very likely that something isn't being addressed. There's some gap in your in what you're expected to complete in your project. So you can also, as kind of a pro tip here, group things as like items, so you don't have to list each quarterly report independently. We don't need to see deliverable first quarter report, second quarter report, third quarter report, fourth quarter report. The task can be quarterly reports through completion of the project, or the deliverable can be quarterly reports through completion of the project, and the tasks can be the preparation steps necessary to complete those quarterly reports through the completion of the project. You really only want to list discrete specific deliverables, right? So that you're not just overwhelming yourself with requirements. And especially for deliverables that are on like a regular schedule, like quarterly reports or semi-annual reports. So here's some kind of here's a generic example of a task and deliverable. So the deliverable is a construction contract. And we've got 3 tasks: prepare bid package, public bid process, sign contract. So when we see this, we're going to say, okay, well, we've got a deliverable, we've got some tasks, but now we're going to have to ask some questions. Did you have your labor compliance information in your bid package? Did you have a pre-bid meeting? Did you have an estimate in your bid package? Did you market the bid to minority business enterprises, women-owned business enterprises, and Section 3 contractors? Did you document that? Where did you document your public bid process? Did you document it online? Do you have it on paper? Where's your cost estimate? When was your cost estimate prepared? Who prepared your cost estimate? Right. So we end up with a lot of questions when you have a really generic deliverable and task list. And we won't necessarily need to get all of these answered, but at some point we'll need to get most of these answered, because these are all kinds of questions where we get monitored, right? So we get monitored on your procurement. Well, now we need to know, was the labor compliance info, was it in there? Was there a pre-bid? Did you weeby? Did you Section 3? Did you document? So questions can add time and they can delay the award process, especially in the over-the-counter. We want you to provide enough information that we don't actually have a lot of questions, that you've prepared your information correctly. Here's an example of a much more detailed task and deliverable. So here the deliverable is a consultant procurement and contract. Task 1, you prepared the RFP. Task 2, you identified consultant scope of work and deliverables. You prepared the independent cost estimate. You documented the appropriate procurement type. You've solicited proposals per the documented appropriate procurement type. You've collected questions and you shared answers via your solicitation process. You reviewed proposals, you completed interviews, you selected your consultant, and you executed your contract. There's not a lot of room there for us to ask questions, right? That's pretty clear that we know that you followed the appropriate procurement process to select that contract. Few more tasks and deliverables. So not every deliverable is going to have a super long list of tasks. Deliverable quarterly reports. Here's an example. It's a 3-task deliverable. You've collected your reports, you review reports, you enter your reports. Collect, enter, upload. It can be pretty simple, but we do want to make sure that you're not just saying, provide reports, because there's more to it than that, right? We want to know that you're having communication with your subrecipients and communicating with your contractors and your consultants. So we don't want to know that you're reviewing the data, that you're taking a look at it, that you're evaluating it. And then we want to make sure that you're tracking on the backup documentation that you need to support that data. So it's not always going to be a super long list, but we do want you to provide enough information that we know that you know what's involved in that deliverable. So what is the right level of detail? We want you to include enough detail so we can tell you know what you're doing. A lot of you have run very successful projects in the past, so maybe a lot of this is stuff that you just do because you're used to doing it and you know how to do it. But we all know that turnover is a thing in government. And one of the best ways to make sure that there are no gaps in your projects and that things continue to move smoothly, not just for you on your end, but for us on our end, is by having enough detail in your deliverables and task lists that we can say, okay, well, they've completed tasks 1 through 5, deliverables 1 through 5 have been submitted, they're now on task 6. And it doesn't matter necessarily very much if you have a temporary substitute rep because somebody is on leave, or if we've hired a new rep and now you've got a new rep to be working with you, because that information's all been documented. So really it shows that you're going to actively manage your activity, that you know how to meet program timelines, and that you're going to be documenting your compliance, right? Because your deliverables are really documentation of your compliance with the federal requirements. Little pro tip down here. If you're thinking about what federal requirements might be triggered, such as record retentions or federal reporting, cross-cutting compliance documentation, financial management, it will help you when you're thinking about what kind of documentation you need to provide, and it will help you when you're thinking about what kind of tasks are involved in providing that documentation. And Connie's motioning me that we have a question.
So comment that our current application setup is not set up to list the deliverables and tasks in the sample format. It appears to be more task driven, not deliverable driven.
So because we were structuring this the best that we could with our new technology, and we're kind of learning as you are also, there's two fields. There's a field for your list of deliverables, and then there's a field for your tasks. And if I was going to do it again, I would have structured it a little bit differently so that those would be a little bit more integrated. But we built it the best way we could when we had it. So, you know, when you're thinking about your tasks, you can list your tasks, you can list your deliverables separately. One thing that I often do is I'll have my list of deliverables, and it'll be deliverable 1, deliverable 2, deliverable 3, deliverable 4, and then when I'm doing my tasks will be task 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4. That aligns with deliverable 1. Task 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, 2.4. That aligns with deliverable number 2, and etc. and so on. That's something that's pretty familiar for a lot of consultants who do multi-deliverable, multitask projects, you know, so you can associate your tasks and deliverables that way. But yeah, we recognize that it's not super perfect. We'll try and fix it next time. For now, it is what we have, so we're going to run with what we've got. So plan in advance how you're going to be documenting your deliverables and how you're going to be storing that documentation, whether you're going to be running a public info binder, whether you're going to have a public information file, what information needs to be in private files. If you're running a project that has personally identifying information, also known as PII, you want to make sure that you have a mechanism to protect that. That is not something that you need to put in your public information binder. An example would be a home buyer program where you have collected income information about a specific household to see if they qualify. That's not public information. That is private information. That is PII. You do not need to submit that information to a public records request. That's information that should be kept under lock and key. You still need to identify how you're going to capture that information, right? That you're going to use a filing system. You're going to use a protected hard drive. You're going to be using however you're going to be structuring your information. I used a lot of accordion files and tabbed files when I would do those types of projects to help me make sure I could track my project information. I also like to use my monitoring report or my monitoring lists for my file headers because it allowed me to know what information was in each section of the file. And it gave me checklists so that I could know that when I had submitted something or I had put something in the file, it was complete. And that goes for both your private files and for your public information files. If you're doing a project that has regular job reports, keep a running log. You want to make sure that you have that information available so that you know what dates your inspectors went out, what they looked at, what they saw, what issues were identified. I also like to use meeting minutes and meeting agendas to help keep track. Memos are another good mechanism. Project management tools are awesome, but if you're going to be using paper files, you want to make sure you have a plan. I know a lot of us are trying to move away from paper, but that's still a fact of life, so you do want to have a mechanism for keeping track of your paper documents. Keep your files current, and this is one of my biggest issues. I have a really hard time keeping my files current because I have so much happening, but the public can ask to look at your public data at any time. And if your files aren't current, it's a big headache when you have to meet a public records request or a public information request. So you want to make sure that you keep your files current, keep your documentation up to date as you're tracking on your documentation. And keeping it named the same as you've named your deliverables in your application can really help you keep track of what you've done and what you haven't done, what needs to be done next. So this one was a pretty short one. Do we have any questions, any comments, concerns, any information, pro tips, recommendations, anything you all would like to know about in terms of tasks and deliverables? And we'd also, appreciate any feedback that you guys have had so far from using this process with the grants management system. While we're waiting on questions, just to remind everyone, if you have questions about the CDBG NOFA, go to cdbgnofa@hcd.ca.gov. You want to make sure that you submit your questions that way so we can get them into the queue for response. And really, we're just looking forward to seeing what you guys submit in your applications. We've seen a few over-the-counter applications come in. We've seen a lot of really good task and deliverable lists that shows that a lot of folks really do know what's involved in their projects. But we felt that since there was a lot of questions involved in when we were doing the workshop, that it would be worthwhile to have this webinar to help make sure that you guys have all of the information available at your disposal. So we'll just hang on here for a minute and give you all a second to submit your questions, and otherwise we will wrap this up. So in the grants management system, we got a question, where in the GMS do you include your deliverables and tasks? So when you're completing your application, there will be a section about your activity description and your activity address. And then right underneath there is going to be a section saying, please describe the tasks involved in completing your activity. So that's where you'll put your tasks. And then the box right under that is going to be a text box that's going to ask you to include your deliverables. I'd strongly, strongly, strongly recommend preparing those in Word or Excel or somewhere else. Do not prepare them directly in the GMS. We haven't had anybody say they've lost data yet in the GMS, but this is a pilot program on a pilot system, so you'll want to make sure that you have backed up your information. So prepare those in Word, organize it in Word, structure it in Word, and then you can copy and paste it directly into the GMS. The GMS does tend to strip out your formatting, so that might be a bit of an annoyance. That's something we're talking with our vendor about. It's something we can't address right now, but it's just something that's kind of the result there.
What about readiness scoring details?
So we're hoping to have all of the scoring information up by the end of this week. We have a meeting later today to finalize the scoring, and then we'll be completing that. When we have scoring information up, we'll send out a notice to everyone who has started an application that the scoring information is up. We're also going to be sending out an e-blast with information. We have some amendments that we need to make to our NOFA. I think y'all are going to be pleased with them. They loosen things up a little bit. We also have a couple of changes that we need to make to the planning application. We'll let you know about that as well. So all of that should be coming out this week. Hopefully it makes things easier for folks. We don't intend to be extending any of our deadlines for the planning applications or for the non-housing competitive, because we think that the changes we're going to make are actually going to make things easier for you, so you shouldn't need more time. But do keep providing us comments, do keep providing us feedback. We're doing our best to be considerate about how we are running so much new stuff and to really be responsive to help make sure that you guys can do the best you can with your projects.
Under which tab in GMS? Does it have to clarify?
I'd recommend, so if you're trying to figure out where to put this in the GMS, go ahead and log into or take a look at our videos on our workshop, because we talk about that pretty extensively in our workshops, and you can go through our workshop and see in our actual applications where this information is required.
Any suggestions based on what you have seen to avoid?
So far, what we have seen has been pretty good, so we don't really have a lot of recommendations to avoid. This is a tool as much that we intend to be as useful to you as much as it is to us. this is really for you to show us that you know what you're doing, but also, an opportunity for you to create a tool to help you manage your projects. Make sure that you understand what's needed in terms of timelines. So we haven't seen enough to have recommendations of what to avoid yet, but if we see it, we'll let you know. But really structure this in a way that makes sense to you. We're not being super restrictive on the structure because we want this to be a useful mechanism for you in managing your projects.
Someone asked 2 more weeks would be helpful.
Yeah, I wish I had 2 more weeks too. We all have deadlines and timelines that we need to address, and extending out the deadlines is sort of a last resort for us. So, if we hear a lot of feedback from a lot of folks that they're just not going to be able to do what they need to do, then we'll consider it. But for the competitive, but we started working with folks fairly early on, and we've done a lot of training and provided a lot of resources. So we're really hopeful that we can all kind of be respectful of each other's deadlines, and move forward with that.
Asking about OTC.
The question is the OTC out of money? No. Is that a good answer? Yeah, the OTC is not out of money. Yeah, so the next question is for the planning is the changes that we're going to be making to the application, will that remove some of the things that are not relevant? Yes, that was an issue that we had with the logic when we put together the applications. A couple of the logic triggers fed through into the planning. We didn't intend for that to happen. So I need to go in there and find them, and it just takes a little bit of time. So we haven't had a chance yet to go in there and actually find them, but we'll take out the things that are not applicable. I know folks have been like, why do I have to show site control on a planning application? It's like, oh, sorry, you don't. We'll get that fixed for you. And it should not impact what you've put in the application at all so far. So those should be really minor fixes, and it will just, you'll see it's no longer required. We'll send you all an update. Anyone who started an application, we'll send you an update when we've made the changes and the fixes to the application so that you can go in and see what the expectation is, or let us know if the fix worked for you. Sometimes the fixes don't go through quite the way we expect them to. This is a pilot program and we are still figuring it out. So if we continue to have issues, that's really the thing that will encourage us to consider extending a timeline. And let's see. Where can I find details about how to prepare a market analysis? Send that one to the CDBG NOFA email. We can provide you a little bit more guidance there. We got any other questions? I'll give folks another minute or two. Oh, thank you. We love the program too. We're so excited about helping to make this be a better program. And we really, really appreciate the patience and support and feedback and cooperation that we've gotten from all of our stakeholders and our participants. It's been a really encouraging experience for us. Hopefully all of you got a notice about the March 19th webinar and conference call and meeting and all of that we're doing for our consolidated plan. We're going to talk about what kind of feedback and information we got during our outreach process on that. So if you're at all interested in kind of hearing about that and potentially providing any additional outreach or any additional feedback, we'd love to hear from you in that event, and that's March 19th. We'll be doing that at from 4 to 6 p.m., I think, to give folks an opportunity to participate after work. So yeah, really looking forward to getting additional feedback. But thank you all. You've been really, really supportive. All right. Well, on that note, we will wrap this up. Thank you guys again, and let us know if you have questions.